Among the most terrifying of all Hindu divinities, there's a mysterious goddess of death and destruction. She goes by the name of Kali, a divinity that no one would ever like to have for enemy, as she is not a figure that you could easily classify as very kind-hearted nor very compassionate. Wherever the goddess is believed to have appeared, death and destruction were most likely sure to have followed. And although this is what we can say at the first thoughts of her character, the myth surrounding this entity, however, is way more complex and far-reaching than what many may think. Simply because the goddess Kali cannot be easily fitted into a typical Western notions of good versus evil, or light versus darkness, but in fact transcends both conceptions. Kali is one of the many forms and probably the most malignant embodiment of the great goddess Shakti. She represents feminine energy, creativity, and fertility. Though the name Kali is an epithet applied to several goddesses, she is commonly seen as the black goddess of destruction. The goddess Kali personifies one of the divine energy of Shiva and incarnates Parvati, so she is the logical wife of the god but plays an opposite role to that of Parvati. While the goddess Parvati appeases and neutralizes Shiva's destructive tendencies, Kali actively provokes and encourages the god in his more malignant form of great destroyer through the dance of existence performed in the cosmic world. Therefore, it's only fair to say that Kali was never meant to tame Shiva, but instead it's Shiva who must calm Kali in her moment of fury. One of the meanings behind her name is the force of time, which relates to the ever-devouring principle that dominates the animated world. In this aspect, she is considered to stand outside of the constraints of space and time, and have no permanent qualities in this regard. She has existed before the universe, was created, and will continue to live even after the universe ceased to exist. Thus, the limitations of the physical world, such as light, darkness, good and evil, do not apply to the goddess Kali. Kali is also related to the Vedic name for one of the tongues that belong to the sacrificial fire. So she might be said to be the embodiment of the Hindu belief which says that the world exists only by the way of sacrifice. What is actually essential for this belief is the idea that the consumption of life is the source of prosperity. In some accounts, she is associated with sexuality and violence, but since she is irresistibly attractive to both mortals and gods, Kali can also represent, especially in later traditions, the love and benevolence of a mother goddess. Despite Kali's origins in battle, she is believed to have evolved into a whole symbol of Mother Nature. In this particular form of goodness, she is referred to as Kali Ma or Mother Kali, a divine figure revered and highly worshipped in Hindu Tantric traditions. Now regarded as the protector of families, if her loved ones, especially children, were harmed in any way, she won't have mercy for those who laid their hands on them. In Tantric meditation, the dual nature of Kali leads practitioners to simultaneously face the reality of death and the beauty of life with the understanding that one cannot exist without the other. In the earliest representations of the goddess, Kali may have been seen as the personification of the evil spirit, leading to a significant amount of description regarding her fearsome appearance. She is usually portrayed as a ferocious woman, with either black or blue skin, wearing a Bengali-type crown of clay which is painted or often gilded. A fearful fighting figure with lips smeared with blood, her tongue hanging out of her mouth while dripping the blood of her victims. An overall portrayal of a terrifying facial expression that immediately inspire fear to those who were unfortunate enough to cross her path. Sometimes she does appear dressed or just with no clothes at all. A half-naked woman wading through gore on the battlefield and drinking the blood of her victims who were slain with a large sword frequently shown in her hand, while brandishing a severed head in another. It is said that at cremation sites, Kali sits upon the bodies of the deceased surrounded by attendant jackals and snakes. The variation of her poses are sometimes those of a fearsome goddess slaying demons who threaten cosmic order, while elsewhere she may be seen dancing or standing with one foot on a prostrate Shiva. In these scenarios, she is shown wearing a girdle of severed human arms and a necklace made of decapitated heads around her neck, both bearing the significance of her rage but also the tantric metaphors for creative power and the detachment from the bonds of karma and accumulated deeds. However, in the 17th century, Kali received a makeover from Tantric Bengali poets in northwest India. No more the terrifying red-eyed crone, she began to be painted as a voluptuous, motherly and beautiful figure with a gentle smile, embellished with attractive jewelries and a pleasing blue complexion. And just like many Hindu deities, she is a multiple-armed figure which number varies and are symbolic. When shown with just 4 arms, she is known as Dakshina Kali, the benevolent mother who protects her devotees and beloved children from misfortunes. One version of the origin of this term comes from the story of the god Yama who lives in the south, which is the lateral translation of Dakshina in English. When Yama heard Kali's name, the awareness of her reputation caused him to flee in terror, and so those who worship Kali are said to be able to overcome death-like situations. Kali is shown as Mahakali when depicted with 10 heads, 10 arms and 10 lower limbs. Each hand carry a various implement representing the power of one Hindu divinity, which are often the identifying weapon of a given god. These 2 distinctive forms symbolize the complete cycle of life, both creation and destruction along with everything that exists in between. And while the goddess continues to brandish decapitated heads and weapons, her right hands generally represent her creative side, among which 2 of them now make soothing and positive gestures which are the mudras of both fearlessness and blessing. Her left hands usually hold either a sword covered in blood, or a freshly decapitated head and a bowl that catches its blood, which altogether portray her destructive nature. However, even these items are symbols of a greater purpose. The sword is said to represent knowledge, and by using it, she cuts away ignorance and opens the gates of freedom. The head portrays the human ego that must be cut off in order to be released from the cycle of death and rebirth, in the intent to achieve the moksha. There are several different versions that tell how Kali came into existence. It's likely that her origins are assumed just like those of most divine figures, with tribal folklore deeply rooted in the history of humankind. The name Kali first appears in the Atharva Veda, a collection of hymns and mantras published between 1200 and 1000 BCE, in which she is not seen as a goddess but rather as a fierce black tongue, one of 7 belonging to Agni, the god of fire. It would take another 400 years before Kali came to be described as an individual in her own right, when she appears around 600 CE as a battlefield goddess personifying the wrath of Durga. Her appearance at this time is dreadful. A skeletal and frightening black crone wearing animal skins and carrying a skull-topped staff associated with tribal shamans, while other scripture of the period associate her beginnings with Shiva. The Linga Purana describes how Parvati was asked to defeat the troublesome demon Daruka, who was terrorizing both mortals and gods but could only be killed by the hands of a female. It's believed that Parvati merged with Shiva in order to retrieve the poison he had swallowed years before. By combining with the poison still held in Shiva's throat, Parvati was turned into the goddess of destruction. When she reappeared in her new form, she quickly eliminated Daruka but paid a huge price. Her bloodlust became uncontrollable and it was impossible for anyone to stop Kali's attacks, which extended to any wrongdoers. Both gods and mortals were at loss of what to expect from the goddess. But fortunately enough, the mighty Shiva intervened and stopped Kali's destructive rampage by lying down in her path. When Kali realized over whom she was standing upon barefoot, she felt ashamed and finally calmed down. With the right foot on his chest, Kali recognized the blissful smile of her true love who was able to pacify her. We previously evoked some of Kali's epithets, so it would be noteworthy saying that Dakshina Kali is often represented with the goddess standing upon Shiva, usually with her right foot forward to symbolize Dakshina Marga or the right-handed path, and any donation for a cause given with the right hand as the right way of doing things that devotees learn from the goddess. In a different version, it was when Shiva addressed Parvati as the Black One, she was greatly offended and shed her dark skin to lose her dark complexion, ultimately generating Kali as a separate entity. From this peculiar event arose one of her many names, Kaushika, which means the sheath, while Parvati is left as Gauri the Fair or the Golden One. This story emphasizes Kali's blackness, which is symbolic of eternal darkness associated with destruction. In her earliest accounts, Kali was frequently associated with violent endeavors on the battlefields of the gods. In one legendary battle with the demon Rakta Bija, she was manifested by Durga, whose anger caused her face to turn dark, resulting in Kali bursting out of her forehead to deal with the situation that has gotten badly out of hand. Rakta Bija was like most demons, he has been causing so much trouble for both people and gods, that the worst thing about him was his ability to produce even more demons. Whenever a drop of blood spilled by the wounded Raktabija hit the ground, it would become a deadly fighting clone, so every time the demon was attacked, the only outcome was more demons to deal with. That the black goddess Kali turned the battle around by killing and eating all the demons she came across, stringing their heads on a chain which she wore around her neck. Raktabija himself was defeated after Kali cut off his head and drank all of his blood so that none of it fall on the ground in the process, preventing any more demons from entering the world. In this myth, Kali reflects the wrath of the goddess Durga like previously mentioned. She is brought into play when decisive action are required, when dark deeds must be confronted with dark deeds. Kali is one of the most well-known Hindu goddesses, mostly because of her immense responsibility, in part because of her dread characteristics and habit of acting unpredictably fast. So everyone, including devout Hindus, were wary of her wrath. For those who tried to control her or get her support by mischievous means, even the biggest devotion couldn't save them after stimulating her fury. There's this story of her escapade with a group of criminals who wished to sacrifice a human to her image in order to gain her favor, but they unwisely chose a monk as a victim. The group dragged him to the nearest temple where they prepared to make the sacrifice right in front of the altar, but due to the sanctity of the monk, her statue was scorched in his presence and suddenly came to life. In her rage, she decapitated the whole group and drained their blood while the young monk found a way to escape. This story demonstrates Kali's refusal to be controlled by those who think they easily understand her triumph over the attributes of ignorance and evil, as well as the absolute impartiality of her nature. We often come across images of Kali standing on an apparently dead Shiva, who nevertheless has an erected phallus. This combination of Shiva's virility and the destructive nature of Kali, plus the fact that the goddess carries a bowl overflowing with the abundance of life, would seem to suggest the necessity of death for fertility and the constant creation of life. It may be said that Kali's fury also represents the spiritual necessity of killing weaknesses of the spirit without mercy in order to discover the true self. The goddess is traditionally worshipped throughout India during the yearly festival of Kali Puja, but she is particularly popular in southern India, where she is often worshipped as a distinct goddess associated with plague, and also revered as the central figure of the Shaktism cult in Bengal. Kali's worship was not always so benign. From the 14th to the 19th century, a cult group called the Thuggee was operating at will in India. An organized sect of professional robbers and murderers whose membership was passed down from father to son. There were cases in which they recruited outsiders, especially criminals, only if they were found worthy or could just end up dead if otherwise. During its peak, the gang reached around thousands of followers, and during the 600 years of its operation, the sect is estimated to have killed anywhere between 500,000 and 2 million people. Thuggees proudly claimed to trace their origin to the battle of Kali against the demon Raktabija, and considered themselves as the children created from her sweat. Pandering to the fiercest aspects of Kali in her requirement for death, destruction and human sacrifice, the Thuggee believed that they were doing Kali's sacred labor. It was the arrival of the British in India that finally put an end to these centuries of terror. They wiped out the Thuggees in the mid-19th century, and the man-slaughtered cult of the religious stranglers ceased to exist. Today, the image of the goddess Kali reflects her duality. She is depicted in the act of killing but smiles engagingly. Her disheveled hair hints an unrestrained bloodlust and alternatively the metaphysical mystery of death that encircles life. Her protruding red tongue accounts for both modesty and her thirst for blood. Her voluptuous breasts for both sexual lust and nurturance. While the three eyes of the goddess represent omniscience, she's able to observe all modes of time, including the past, the present and the future. And finally, her nakedness simultaneously portrays carnality and the purity of nature, representing her power to strip away illusions while her hands are raised in blessing. Although Kali is often seen as a terrifying figure in Western culture, there are more benign and positive aspects of the goddess. The conflict of her personality follows the widely held notion that out of destruction comes the possibility of rebirth. Hopefully you found this video interesting. If that's the case, do consider subscribing, commenting and sharing, as it allows the channel to grow. If you have anything you would like to be discussed on the channel, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as always, stay curious.